disclaimer, you know that the president and the president emeritus of this group are both named Don. So the joke is that they call them the Dons. So when the Dons call me, I show up. You know what I'm saying? I'd make sure I make it here. So I'm always thrilled to be able to share stories here and with this amazing group. With the history of the river going, you know, so many, over 150 years of building ships on the lake, or on the river system, and then going into the lighthouses and everything else. There's so much history to be told here, and it really does hinge around the Soo Locks too. It took me forever. You'd think as a Youper kid that I would have all this knowledge from when I was born, like they teach you in school, but they don't in Gwynn High School mention the Soo Locks at all, which I think is a terrible shame. But I was lucky enough with the television access, and my brother Brian Donaldson is here from TV5, the access that we have as camera guys and reporters to be able to go to places, to fly the missions that we've been able to fly with the Coast Guard and the Air Force, and especially the Coast Guard, and then going with the Army Corps, and they just say, show everybody what's here. Well, what can I see? They say, well, what do you want to see? And if for anybody who's watched Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, he's like the patron saint of the Soo Locks. If you saw his show, he went all through the locks, and I'll show you some of the places he went. He also went to the Mackinac Bridge, so he's a great emissary. The only problem I have is that my wife has a crush on Mike Rowe. So there's a bone to pick with that guy for sure. Let's talk about the Soo Locks and what the problem was. Why did we need to have an elevator system to move ships? And this is, you're looking at it, this is the existing river of the St. Mary's. So Lake Superior is about 18 feet higher than Lake Huron. And in order for those places to equalize out, we have a water system that comes through and causes these great cascades, which the Native Americans found out this is a fantastic place for whitefish. So this was a place that they would set up to net and you know, catch as many fish as they could. But as we started to discover things, especially copper up in the Upper Peninsula, and eventually all the iron ore that's come out, which is really the king cargo coming out, this was a real problem. So how do you get boats to go from the lower lakes and up? Well, there's a couple of different ways that they actually worked out. And this was why they needed to get boats up there. As we started, we had a couple of different ports. We have Carp River, which you guys might know now as Marquette. They had, of course, the settlement Fort Wilkins was up here, so a military presence, and we have Copper Harbor and all the copper that's coming out of the copper country. Ontonagon was big then too. As you look at Madeline Island, there was actually a very significant mission that was all around this area here, and then of course Superior, Wisconsin, eventually into Duluth. So all of these areas, and even some mining that actually took place at Isle Royale as well. This was all areas that had to make their way eventually all the way past Whitefish Point and go down through the Soo area here, but they couldn't get around those falls. There were some people that could shoot the rapids, and they would tear the heck out of their boats. So it wasn't the best option, but there were people who did it. So what did they do? Well, Sheldon McKnight was actually the postmaster of Detroit. He figured he could start his own business and have a boat on this end and a boat on this end of the rapids. And he actually eventually put a rail system in here, which he started off with one pony and then worked his way up to dual horses to offload all the cargo and then drag it back. They thought, well, that's a good idea, and then they started building to move. They had to build their own schooners on the Lake Superior shoreline and then sail them out. But eventually, when the steamships came real popular, they said, why can't we just kedge anchor those out and winch them on rollers all the way down Main Street, back and forth? And they did this with at least 5 to 6 of these steamers, including the Manhattan you see right here. The Illinois was also taken this way, Captain Jack Wilson. This would take 4 or 5 months to wedge this thing along, and sadly when they launched the Baltimore, it tripped over and killed 4 people. So this is a very dangerous thing to do. So but the answer was there. We've known since the early, 1,000 years after the Christ was born, they had lock systems in China. So we knew there was a way to block the water, raise it up and let the water equalize and let a ship come through. Just, it was expensive to do it. And if you think back to 1850 or so, Michigan didn't have any money to do it. We were a brand new state. So they said, well, how are we going to pay for this? So the federal government worked with Michigan to come up with 75,000 acres. And they said, just give these away to whoever will build the Soo Locks. Here's a guy that is really now our patron saint of the Soo Locks. This is Charles Harvey. Has anybody been to Marquette? Have you ever driven through Harvey, the town? It's named for this guy. This is Chuck, my new friend. He was a salesman working for the Fairbanks brothers, and the Fairbanks had a great invention. This was a scale that you could put any weight on and actually get a very accurate measurement out of it. And of course, he was doing very well as that, but as he came into the Soo area and heard about the problem they had there and heard that they wanted financiers to actually dig the lock, which was estimated by the first engineer at about $500,000. He was way off. And we'll find out why because of what happened. But the Fairbanks team, the Fairbanks brothers came in, brought in Erastus Corning and a couple other bigwigs, and came up with the dough to be able to start digging. The problem was, and Harvey actually took two different roles. The first role he got was to be the superintendent of all the construction, which was big enough. The second was he was one of the two surveyors that the state of Michigan said, go pick the land you want. So his job was to figure out, how can I get the most copper? How can I get the newly discovered iron ore that was now coming out of Ishpeming and Negaunee, and eventually, of course, Marquette, they were smelting it. And how can I get some land where people can actually move to and live? Because some of this was good farmland too, and it was all wide open for them to choose. This is an early picture of the first lock. This was considered, the name was State Lock, so it's very interesting to see. This is about 1852, and the problem was that Charles Harvey did not realize how tough those Yooper winters were, eh? Those are a tough winter, and the season was so much shorter that it took 3 more years than he even bargained for as he started to dig. The second thing was Harvey and a couple of the other investors thought, you're going to need limestone to be able to put on this channel you're going to build. So they went down to Drummond Island where they have great dolomite, but it's horrible for building. And they went and they bought all this land up thinking they were going to make a killing, and none of it was good. So they got some great farmland. They probably ended up selling to, who's the guy from Domino's Pizza that bought up half that island? Monahan. But literally, they were stuck with property that they eventually did do some gravel out of there, but the dolomite still has a mine out of there now. Here's getting quality limestone. This is an actual manifest for the schooner Eclipse. One of the boats that actually was loaded as you go down to the Cedar Point area at Sandusky. This would be Marblehead, which is right across the bay from there, and that's where all of their stone came from. So pretty cool to see that. The Eclipse was lost, of course, you know I'm the shipwreck guy. Eclipse was lost in 1882. The lifesavers at Grand Sable, which is what we call Big Sable Point, managed to get everybody off, which was good. One person was lost. The other thing they didn't think about was, of course, cholera. Up north, they thought because of the clean air that the only real problem up there would be the bugs, and it wasn't. Cholera came in really strong, wiped out 200 people, including their stonemason, the actual supervisor of that. So very devastating for them there as well. Here's some early pictures. The first one to go through on June 18th, 1855 was the paddle wheeler called the Illinois. And Jack Wilson, the guy that actually brought the Baltimore over, dragging it over, got to be the skipper to bring it through. Imagine how much easier that was. Here he did it in, 20 minutes is all it took to really get in the lock and raise up and down, where it took several months to move the Baltimore. The second one through going the other way was the Baltimore itself. The sad thing about Wilson is that he later took another vessel that spent a lot of time at the locks, a lot of time on Superior, but sadly the Lady Elgin was wrecked. The worst open water disaster we've ever had, 1860 on Lake Michigan, where over 400 people lost their lives in a horrible accident when it collided with the Augusta. So Jack Wilson, unfortunately, was killed in that. These are great pictures of the actual capstan, the method that they actually open and close the gates, which were very, very heavy. We'll see some pictures here in just a little bit of what they look like. This is a great early picture too. They could load them up, and the original thought was with the locks they could actually bring in 2, 3, 4 ships. As they dug the bigger ones, we'll take a look at the Weitzel and a couple other ones. They could do 4 ships, as they basically were only 200 feet long. But what was happening was they dredged all along. In fact, here's a good shot too. This is Fort Brady. That was the big fort that was along here. And they realized they needed to dig something for the longer 300-foot ships that were coming out, because now we're starting to move more iron ore. They need to have that cargo come through. They need deeper drafts, so they started to blast out the rock itself. This is cannons right here from Fort Brady. And as they dug the Weitzel, they thought, we'll do it on the shore side of where the original state lock came through. The problem with that location is the fort was right here. So they moved the fort up the hill. And the other problem was there was an Indian graveyard that was right next to where the canal was going to go through right here. So this is my drawing of the original lock here, and then you see my drawing here is this little yellow widening of what they would do as the Weitzel would come through right here. So here's Fort Braley coming back up, and look at this close-up right here. Old Indian burial ground. They plowed right through here. And as they did, the word was out that they should take and find any Native American skulls that they could to send them for phrenology. And this is a crazy science that they called it at the time, where they would measure the skulls. People were perplexed that the Native Americans were so far behind us in technology, and they thought it was due to brain size, which was ridiculous. But they would fill these with sand and then measure them against the capacities of other brains to try to make it, to try to understand why this was true. And of course, once they were done with these, even more sacrilegious, they put them on display. This is the Army Museum where they'd actually have the skeletons all laid out. And these guys were actually here for decades. And then at least 7 to 8 skeletons were brought to the Smithsonian and were put in boxes for years and years. And I'll share what happened to those in just a minute. This is the first stone coming out for the Weitzel. You can see how they excavate all of that. We'll see this guy a couple of times, the old portable boilers. And you can see where they're digging that all out. The amount of stone that they moved out of there, and this was a real problem. They thought it was just going to be sandstone when they first got up there, because that's what you see a lot of. But as you get down near the bedrock, it's all granite. So that's why it was taking so much longer, and all of these projects turned into way over budget, way over time, except one when we get to the MacArthur Lock. Here's a nice picture of the back end of the city of Cleveland. This was the first one to go through the Weitzel. This is the control tower right here, the original. And you can see where there's actually an international bridge being kind of expanded over here for the trains at least. And this is where they would sit to raise and lower the vessels as they came in, hanging up lights to tell people which one you could take, because now they had 2 different choices to use there. Of course, they went through an Indian burial ground, and I'm not a guy that does ghost stories, but I would say that Farquhar, the guy that was in charge of it, dropped dead. And nobody knew anything about, why he got sick. They called it Bright's disease, which I believe is a liver disease, which is why he passed away. But we really don't hear much about Frank Farquhar at all, but great career beforehand, and got caught up, I think, in the spiritual nature, if you will. As I mentioned, several of the ships have been lost too, that have gone through that lock too, but I, again, don't put a whole bunch into the ghost stories. Here's how the locks work. You can see where one side would be higher than the other. They'd close the door, the boat would come in, they'd actually equalize and bring the water down, so it'd take about a half hour. It takes longer, probably an hour-long process to get the boat safely into the area. And we'll look at some of the windlasses and stuff too that they would actually bring these boats in with, and the technology that's going to be updated soon here. Here's General Godfrey Weitzel. This is a guy where it was named for. Look at this career. West Point, you'll see a lot of West Point guys from here. He accepted the Confederate surrender of Richmond. He was the acting Union major at New Orleans. He was evicted, the French out of Texas, put the first light at Alpena, designed Standard Rock along with Poe, designed the range system at Saginaw, so close to home here, and helped Poe with Spectacle Reef. So great career, and a lock named for him as well. Here's where they're blasting out the Nebish. And if you've ever been on this winding river that goes down towards, you leave from the Soo Locks and go down towards as you're heading for Lake Huron, there's a place called Rock Cut that they also had to blast out. And as ships got heavier and heavier and made out of steel, they ended up moving lighthouses like Detour to try to compensate, because now these vessels were running aground on things that wooden vessels wouldn't, but the big metal boats are coming in. As we get to 1913, you're starting to look at 600-foot vessels, so these things are pretty intense. Here they are removing the original lock and taking those blocks out that we talked about that came out of Sandusky, Ohio. And Poe, who was working on this project, was just overwhelmed by the technology and the craftsmanship that went into that first lock. He just said he hated tearing it apart because it was such a beautiful structure. But they had to have a bigger lock. They had to have a wider lock too, as these vessels were starting to get a little bit wider as well. as they built this new Poe, a giant crack appeared in the ground down here, and water came pouring in. And here's that boiler that's on the rail in deep water. Nobody lost their lives here, but they had to pump it all back out again, eventually getting dry down here and to get through. So it wasn't easy work by any means. And if anybody's ever been up to the UP when those black flies are out, I'll take mosquitoes any day. These black flies will bite through your socks, your shoes, and I don't know how they deal. Somebody told me they're buying up all the property at Keweenaw because, you know, as global warming comes, everybody's going to move up there. I said, they have no idea about the bugs that are up there. Ain't nobody going to live up there. But I love it, though. It's God's country, and I love to be there. Here's the new control building that they're building. This was considered the powerhouse as they put it up in 1896. You can see them building the control tower here. And this is across from Marblehead is Kelly's Island. And this is where, especially as you get into 1896, all of the companies were being bought up by Kelly's Island limestone. And so this is where this stone all came from, and this building is amazing. If you ever get a chance to go during Engineers Day, how many people have been there for Engineers Day? Oh, sweet, good. Yeah, there's so many. It's a great opportunity to get in there. Now I think with COVID, there's been some restrictions, but I'm pretty sure this year they're going to give you access here. And of course, I'll give you a picture of what's inside anyways, at least one of them. So here you go, the control tower is all built. This is a totally different control tower than what I actually got to hang out in. But it's just amazing with 2 locks. And immediately we started to see incredible increases where Germany and England were the leaders in creating steel around the world. Not anymore. We started to crank through, you know, 1 million tons came out, and all of a sudden we're even taking over our mines that we had in Michigan were hardly anything compared to Pennsylvania. Pretty soon now the mines in Michigan, and especially when they found a higher quality ore in Minnesota, the Mesabi Range, and eventually opening up north of there, we knew that that was better steel, and that's why all of a sudden these locks became the vital area for any kind of steel that was being created in the world, especially as we went into World War I and then World War II. This was considered a jugular vein, and quite honestly, a big target they were worried that people would hit during the wars. Here's me with my selfie, and you can see the marble columns that are inside here. It's a beautiful building, and I only had a couple minutes. I literally, you know, when we go on these missions, it's literally a couple of hours while you're there, and most of the time we spent in the lock. So I'm running through the building trying to snap pictures, and just to show how beautiful it was inside. This is just a brief career on General Poe, and for my friends here who love lighthouses, you know that there's a Poe lighthouse, and it's a neat one that's up by Sheboygan. Another West Pointer, chief engineer during Sherman's March to the Sea, so very significant as we go through our Civil War. Work at Standard Rock and especially Spectacle Reef. The design there was so unbelievably life-changing as we looked at trying to build a lighthouse that wouldn't be pushed off with all the ice flows that come through the straits. He came up with the design that would interlock using a lot of the technology we picked up from Minot's Reef and especially Eddie's that's in England. They interlocked these blocks that were again from the Marblehead area. And it just, Poe would revolutionize the design. At the World's Fair, a model of Spectacle Reef was there because they wanted to show the world that this was the technology that we had and what kind of engineering we had. Deep in the Detroit River at Limekiln, he had the Harbor of Refuge built at Sand Beach, which really there was no place to hide if you think going up Lake Huron. Very significant. Rebuilt the original lock at the Soo, and of course the namesake for the Poe, which you see a side view right here of how the locks run with the chambers where the water comes through here, and we'll get a closer look at what those look like in a moment here. This is August of 1896. Revenue cutter Andrew Johnson is coming through, and you can see it's a side wheeler, and the USS Hancock is coming through as well. First lock for boats through this lock as they opened it up, the new Poe, which was the mega size. Look at how many boats you could put in there at that time. Now we think of a 1,000-footer and it barely squeeze into something like that. Here's a nice barge coming in. This is a great aerial view, probably from the new control tower. And looking out, you can see one entrance. This is all going to get widened out, and they're going to take everything out of here from the hatcheries. All the stuff that was down here, the fishing villages as well. All this would eventually become a 4-lock system that we'll show you in a moment. Here's the 50th anniversary of the locks, and this is a big deal because now we've become a superpower because of our output, because of the locks. Harvey's still alive, so he gets to be there and really soak it in with the Vice President of the United States, Charles Fairbanks, coming to the party. And this whole area was all filled up with all kinds of different displays and such. And if you see the Native American teepees that are here, this is kind of a reenactment of General Cass. I don't know how many of you know the history of Cass coming to the Sioux, but the story goes that he came up to try to get some property for Fort Brady, and when he walked in, one of the native chiefs, a lesser chief named Shashaba, came up to him and was upset that they were trying to buy the property. And in order to show he was mad, he wore a British coat. Now remember, this is right after the War of 1812. So he shows up in this British red coat, and he's already insulting these Americans who, you know, have higher firepower and such. And so he runs down and he goes to his he actually has a wigwam. The teepees weren't used by the Chippewa here, but he had a wigwam that was set up with a big pole, and he runs the British flag to the top of it. And Cass doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to cause an incident here, so he takes his sword off and he lays it down on the bottom. And he walks up to it and he lowers the British flag and doesn't say anything and throws it on the ground and stomps on it. And he says, "You will not do this in the United States of America." And all the other chiefs are looking at him like, whoa. This was pretty significant. The deal was signed. He got the property for the fort, and they reenacted this right here. So the spectacle at the Sioux, the gala at the Sioux was another part. This was an actual accident at the Canadian locks, and I could spend another hour just talking about why the Canadians had to build their own lock. Again, it was a big snafu between the United States, but they had a very significant lock until the Perry Walker ran into the North Gate. And when they did, all that water came pouring out. And 2 freighters that were in there, including the Crescent City, got washed all the way down through there. And the Crescent City made it over here and had a giant hole in the side, and they just luckily grabbed it and pulled it all the way down so that they could get it out of the way as it sank and was right against the dock when it went down. So luckily the Crescent City sailed again. As you might know, it actually went into, it just survived the 1905 storm, which was pretty significant. Sent several freighters to the bottom, the Crescent City being one of them, just rebuilt in 4 years later. So these are some great pictures of the 3rd lock being built, and as the 3rd and 4th lock were built, they weren't named for anybody, as they typically don't. They just kind of give them a government name like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they later name them for people that are significant. But these pictures are amazing in 2 different ways. The first is, now we're not working with limestone anymore. We're using limestone, but we're grinding it up and we're making cement. And it turns out that there's a couple of the guys here that pretty much wrote the book on cement. So if you look at the technology as they put these together and look at all the re-rod and everything going in to creating the sides of the actual lock itself, and then to pour, you know, thousands and thousands of tons of cement to go in there. And here, there's to dig it out, to have it, you know, it's amazing. You can see the Bascule Bridge here too, the big train bridge that used to be out there. This is very significant. The very low part of the locks where the water comes through. This is this will eventually become the Davis. The next one will be the Sabin. This is what they're going to end up having to tear out this summer. So this is what's waiting for these guys to actually tear out in order to dig a lock as big as the Poe, to have something big enough to have for this 4th lock that we'll have out there. We'll only have 3 because they'll actually take all the spoils from this, throw that into the Davis, and then the Sabin will be dug out. So this is what awaits them. And the problem is they can't just blow it up. They have to use a special technique of explosions because there's so much stuff around that area, including the new International Bridge, that they cannot blow up. It is a bad idea. So they're going to have to use some cool technology. And the good news is I'm on the list to be there when they explode it. So we'll bring some stuff to you guys as soon as we get that all situated. Here's those lock doors, and I'll give you a good view when we take a look at the fourth lock going in. But look at the size of this and how much water can be in there. And you can see the arresting gates are going in. There's a lot of technology, but those gates are really, and they're mitered so that they close, and the water pressure actually seals them so that the pressure keeps it from leaking, although there's always some water that kind of comes through. Here you go, people. That's massive. I don't know why they redacted this photo. Why did they take the date off of here? Like, we couldn't figure it out. But we know this is 1914. We know that this lock came in as almost a duplicate to the next one they're going to build. This building is still here. This is the Davis building. And this would house the pumps that would be required to dewater the locks every winter so that they could actually do maintenance when the ships couldn't move because of the ice. This was a great place to pump the water out, and so the Davis building is still there, and it's a pretty cool building. This is one I did not go through, but there's only winches and pumps and stuff that's inside there anyways. Look at how crowded this is getting now. So we've got a big freighter in the background. This is the steamer William Livingstone, which was named for the president of Lake Carriers. We've got a couple of tugboats here, and you'll see the Alfred Noble in a couple of these because it's the Army Corps' boat. So this is one of the few ships that actually got to be in two openings of the locks, number 3 and 4. And of course the Gladwin too, which is significant because that'll also be in there under a different name. So we actually see the brand new building that was built for the Davis. We've got the Davis lock, and look at, they're already starting to dig number 4. This will eventually become the Sabin. They're starting to cut that out, and they've got to work on the approaches as they come in through here. But it's starting to get crowded up there, and to think the amount of boats that were being brought through these locks loaded with iron ore is just staggering. Here's Brigadier General Davis, and very significant. Again, third in his class at West Point, 66, in charge of the construction of the third and fourth locks, designed Port Sanilac Lighthouse and the Fog House at Sturgeon, dredged Bar Point, which was significant as you go down the Detroit River into Lake Erie, an area that's hung up a lot of boats, including one that was built in Bay City and had an actual, they lost a sailor from Bay City on board during the 1916 storm. St. Clair River did some there, Potomac, Mississippi Rivers afterwards, fortifications at San Diego during the Spanish-American War, and of course they renamed it after he died in 1926. The third lock became known as the Davis Lock. This is a big surprise as I'm putting these together, and I'm always trying to find something new that maybe people wouldn't know. And this came back from another interview, and you probably know from the stories that I do on PBS, I've done more interviews with shipwreck survivors and lighthouse keepers than anybody around. I've got a great collection. I've just been very blessed with having access to the men and the women who've been involved, not only in storms but living in the Coast Guard and going into the rescuers too. And I heard a story from my friend Oscar Daniels. And he told me about his dad worked on a bunch of bridges, and he goes, he worked on the Soo Locks. And wouldn't you know it, I start looking at the Sabin, and Oscar Daniels' company was there when a big explosion happened. This is at that dock where we said they went right through the Indian graveyard. There was a huge explosion, and everybody thought, well, it had to be blasting caps from them building the lock. It wasn't. As you look at the newspapers kind of fade out, but if you get into the government records, they talk about somebody going down to the dock to dump fireworks off. So they had all these explosives that were on board there, dumped them out, and unfortunately there was a couple of that Coast Guard boat there. 2 Coast Guardsmen were killed. This says 6 are killed. 4 is the count that I saw, with 2 very severely wounded. And it's possible they might have passed away. Usually the government report will have everything in there, but you don't always know. But Oscar Daniels was the company. I mentioned Great Lakes Dredge too, because these guys did a lot of work on this as well. This is on board the SS Dredge, and you see a hard hat diver going in right here. That would be a gig to do your dives right there. Lake Superior is pretty clear, so it would be a nice dive compared to, say, Lake Erie and stuff where you don't see much. But if this company that was affected by this, and there was an attempt to sue first of all, the Army Corps, but they had nothing to do with this. There was an attempt to sue Oscar Daniels too, and because it was an explosion, it tied it into a totally different story. Remember, Oscar Daniels was the guy who survived the explosion at Standard Rock. So it's not tied together at all, but here he is telling me about how the lighthouse exploded out in the middle of Lake Superior, and he kept mentioning about his dad, and his dad was the one that was involved in the explosion at the Soo Locks. So just an aside that you just don't think about, his leg was badly cut. They had to crawl out of the window, and as this thing burned, there was old coal reserves inside. And this is 60 miles out in the middle of nowhere. This is the most remote lighthouse on the Great Lakes. And it exploded and blew up the top, the machinery building. I mean, it's completely gone, the top here. And the windows are all blown out, and the rails are all bent. But they survived 3 nights out on the deck here with a tarp and a can of tomatoes. And the Coast Guard just didn't find them because there was a big storm and too much noise, and nobody reported the light not reporting in, as they always did every morning, and Oscar survived it with 2 other guys. Their lifeboat, by the way, dropped into the water and sailed away, and one guy jumped in to try to save it, and it was 36-degree water. I can't even imagine. So here we are at the opening of the locks that Oscar Daniels' company built. This is the 4th lock. Eventually this would be named the Sabin. And this is the one that wasn't named for a general. In fact, Sabin had a great career but was not a military man. And you look inside here, and here's the steamer Livingstone again, the Lydecker, which is back here. And then you've got the tug again that came through. Here's Louis Sabin. This is the guy it's named for. Born in Memphis. They did call him the Colonel. They gave him kind of an honorary title, I think, because he's the only one that didn't have a rank. University of Michigan grad, so representing, expert on cement. This is the guy that kind of wrote the book on making cement, literally. If you go through the old reports, especially at the turn of the century, Sabin's techniques were pretty revolutionary. Assisted at the waterworks in North Dakota, CNA Railroad Bridge at South Forks, Merchants Bridge, also an engineer on the Poe Lock, and of course the vice president of the Lake Carriers Association, which is a pretty big deal too, representing all the companies from 28 to 48. This is cool because this lock still exists, and it's now dammed off. They actually have big caissons in the way, so you can't go in there. I don't know if this capstan is still there. That would be amazing because it says St. Mary's Falls Canal right on it. Now, I'm sure they've got this destined for a museum if they don't already have it up there. And if somebody knows, raise your hand and let me know. But this is right in front of one of the control buildings. They have short outboard buildings there for monitoring and having some switching equipment. And here's the actual prints for that capstan. So I'm hoping this is still there. I hope when I go on my tour I can look for it, because you don't get a lot of close-ups in these photographs. We were just lucky that somebody went through in the 40s and took a lot of extra pictures of controls and stuff. In the early days, you could barely get a wide picture, so you didn't take many close-ups, and it's great to get just a little bit of a flavor of what was there. This is some movies that I found here in Bay City. I think these were from Demora, I believe, but you can see the control building right next to it, and you can see the Hatfield actually coming through. It's a Josh Hatfield, so I know it's after 1923 because that's when it was built. And I know that lady right there. No, I'm just pretending. I don't know her. So great to see early locks, and with the curved gates too, we know that it's very early on. As they start to build during World War II, you don't see a lot of photographs of the building of the MacArthur Lock. There's a couple reasons for that. The first was this was such a vital area, it was secure, and so during that time it's very difficult to get pictures. Also, this one only took 18 months to build, so where these other ones took years because of the wartime effort, they doubled up. And they were able to rebuild at the Weitzel. They basically gutted it and added the MacArthur Lock that we still use today. And that's, of course, named for General MacArthur. And the first boat to go through was a Carl Bradley. And this always surprised me. I mean, it's a great honor to have the world's biggest lock, have the world's largest freshwater vessel go through. But the Bradley never needed the Soo Locks. The Bradley was exclusively hauling limestone for steel production and other cement production, mostly going from the Rogers City around under the Mackinac Bridge area after the bridge was built, and going all the way down to from 1928 when she was launched all the way down to Gary. And it was 600 feet long, a massive vessel. And as many of you know, this is the largest shipwreck now on Lake Michigan, too. It went into a horrible storm in 1958, and there's only 2 survivors. 33 men drowned when this thing broke in the middle and went down. And it's still a controversy. We went and dove it. In fact, you were with me, weren't you, Brian? Yeah, Brian and I went down and were there for the launching of the submarine when the first humans went down to check out this wreck. We had to relocate the Bradley, which is in 300 feet of water. And this is right after the dives that I did on the Fitzgerald. And people were pretty upset that we were going to go down and find crew members. But the truth was, there's only about 4 guys that they didn't find from this shipwreck, and they're probably in engineering. The problem with this wreck, unfortunately, was the badly designed life jackets, and the people would slip right out of them. They eventually put crotch straps into the life jackets after this because of the fact that they just weren't designed correctly. So would it save more lives? I don't know. In November 1988, you hit the water, you don't get a lot of time. And sadly for Frank Mays and for the first mate, these guys flipped over several times, and luckily the life raft is the same right side up as it is upside down, so you can just swim back to it and cling to it. And then the Coast Guard cutter Sundew came out and rescued them. I was lucky enough to meet the captain of the Sundew and actually fly him back as part of my documentary called Cutter Rescue. And the skipper was in Florida, and he goes, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go back and break ice. He goes, okay, I'll go with you. What's the temperature? I said, it's minus 26, skipper. And he's in Bradenton. He's like, are you kidding me? I said, your plane ticket's waiting, sir. All you have to do is get on the plane. And he showed up, and we had so much fun. And it brings up a good point, because the Sundew was turned into a museum and put on display in downtown Duluth. And I thought this would be a huge draw, just like our amazing lightship that we have in Port Huron. But nobody went to go see it. And I say that now because right now our museums are suffering. We're lucky that Whitefish Point, I'm a board member up at Whitefish, we've had record turnout last year. But with gas prices coming up this year, we're very nervous. And for the people who did not get that kind of love during COVID, there's a lot of these museums that are really in trouble right now. So I would say, remember your museums, remember your libraries. These are all very vital right now. And I think we start to forget of how important, especially our libraries are. Each one is an individual repository for me of the history of that area. And I could not do these talks without these amazing groups, just like the River Society here. It's just critical that they get people that will join, not only sharing treasure with the money you can donate, but volunteering to be able to do just even hours here. It's so critical. So here's the Bradley, unfortunately one of the big shipwrecks, and once Queen of the Lakes for the longest time. The only vessel that's been queen longer is the Paul Tregurtha that's out there now and reigns supreme. Even the brand new one they're building is not going to be as big. So this is a neat picture here. This is the Sabin lock, and I hope that you guys will recognize this boat. This is the Edmund Fitzgerald. Have you ever heard of it? Here's all the hatches, 21 hatches on this boat. Edmund Fitzgerald in the Soo. You can see the big tanks as they're lining up to go through the Sabin. The Meisner, this is Scott Meisner. It's 230. We can tell because of the Soo Locks logs. This is going into where it's an 80-foot log, or 80-foot wide with a 75-foot ship. So look at these guys. It's barely squeaking through. And the reason that they're coming through this lock, this smaller lock, is because the William Clay Ford, here's the chief engineer, this is Freeman, this is the first skipper, Captain Bert Lambert. Look at the hatch clamps on there too. Here's the lifeboat that they found, and they're just coming through now. The William Clay Ford was coming through because it was laden, it had iron ore on board, it needed the deeper lock. So this one could barely squeeze through. And here it is going out into a storm, and there's been a lot of arguments to people. They always tell me about the Fitzgerald, and we talk about the hatch clamps and how they were significant. The video in here proves that they were going out on their very first trip into a storm without all their hatch clamps on. So there's a lot of, every picture I've seen of that vessel, and look at how big it was. This was the largest in the Great Lakes. It surpassed even the Bradley. There were a couple other 700-footers at that time, but this was the queen for at least another year until they launched 2 more that came out of, this would be out of Great Lakes Engineering Works, just south of Detroit as you go down the river. This area launched 2 freighters here too, and once these 2 once the three, the Homer, the Jackson, and the Fitzgerald were gone, Michigan stopped building freighters. We were the kings for a long time, but this was the end of it. A big ship, 26,000 tons of iron ore pellets. That's 1.6 billion pellets that were on board when it went down. And the footage is just amazing. Just neat to try to line up all the people, and especially as we dove it, we saw a lot of this was parts upside down. Here's some spare propeller blades. We found a missing crewman, unfortunately, on our expedition, which was horrifying. I mean, when you talk about, you know, going on a dive like that, and Brian knows, you're super excited because you're going out to see, in this case, the largest shipwreck ever lost on any of the Great Lakes. And then all of a sudden that happens, and you're just bottom out with just despair and realizing that there's 29 guys that lost their lives there. And then, you know, you're back up again as you start to discover things that the Coast Guard missed. I mean, we clearly had the report of what the Coast Guard saw, and they were saying that the bell was missing. They were saying all kinds of stuff that was inaccurate. And there's so much information now, and because I've gotten a COVID vacation from PBS, they laid off 13 of us, and I'm not coming back. I've been able to write not only bottled goodbyes, but I'm halfway through the Edmund Fitzgerald book that I've always wanted to read, you know, to put together. So super excited to share that. All right, here we go. Now we're seeing some of the digging from 1969. This is actually when they're starting to renovate one of the locks as we go in, and we're looking at this time now we're going to do a $10 million or $40 million, forgive me, dollar project to actually dig out the Poe to make it into, you know, the size it is now. And you can see the amount that was done. This was a Canadian company that came in, McNamara, and the labor disputes. You know, we think about how much they took advantage of these people in 1855. These guys that were dying by the hundreds. The labor disputes that were very legitimate in some parts, and one part they actually walked off the job because they didn't have ice water. So it got to a point of ridiculousness, even to the point where when they went to open the Soo Lock, or the new lock, the Poe, they invited the President of the United States, but then they had to cancel, and then they had another strike, and then they had to cancel another VIP. All their invites went out twice. And the guy finally at the lock said, I'm not inviting anybody else because I don't know when we're going to actually open this. So we're looking down the river now, and you can actually see the powerhouse as we go by, and I'll take you on a quick tour of that before we're done. You can see the back of the freighter as we go through. Neat pyramid, you know, look around, you can see the tower there, and you see the brand new. We know what year this was, obviously, because of the excavation, but in '62 is when they built the bridge there too, so it gives us some clues as to actually what happened. So not much fanfare when they opened up the new lock. This is the Poe rebuilt, and this is 1968. The Philip Clark was the first to go through twice. They reenacted it to come through again, and I think it actually came back and was the first downbound too, just because of the turnaround. And 18,000 tons of ore coming through, going from Duluth to Conneaut. So a very tiny amount when you really think about the big guys that go through now. Here's the Stewart Court. I mean, this one took the record when it first went through. This is 1,000 feet long. It's the only 1,000-footer with a front end that actually has the pilot house here. All of the other big 1,000-footers have them all aft. And a lot of the crew quarters up here too, where everything is aft on the other ones. This would be in May of 4th of '73, 49,000 tons. So here's Fitzgerald coming through at its highest time, was getting 30,000 tons, was a fantastic cargo. The Fitzgerald being the first to make 1 million tons in one season, and now you start getting these 1,000-footers coming through doing 3 million tons in one season. It's amazing how much ore actually comes through. This is the Jugurtha actually in the locks. A cold visit, Brian, man, can I remember this?
847-509-8149. Now we have the Walmax International because we know a lot of you.
They'll be shutting the gates here.
You would think that I'd have like antifreeze in my blood being born and raised up there, but it does affect us. The good thing about winters in the UP is that you can always put more layers on. I get more bothered by the summer when you can only take so much off and then the police get called. Here's the Jugurtha going down. We're now lowering down. This is the largest freighter on the Great Lakes. It's going down to the level of Lake Huron. And again, it only takes 18 minutes or so to do it. This is the old control areas. This would have been in probably, I think I left in 97 TV5, so this probably would have been 95, 96. Look at the blowing wind. It's the wind chills up there. It's what those meteorologists tell me. It just goes right through you. And when we came back to do the stuff I'll show you in just a little bit, it was all ice. Just impossible to walk around. And this is what these guys, this is their maintenance time. So this is what they have to deal with all the time. And look at this snowbank. Just crazy. You know what they say in the UP, that basically summer is 2 months of bad sledding. That's here's the MacArthur Lock, here's the new Poe, here's the Davis, and here's the Sabin with that big caisson. See how they plug the ends here? So they haven't used these two locks. And the plan is, and here's the main power plant too I'll take you to. So when we took our tour, we went across here, went down to the bottom in here, and I'll take you all the way through here. And then we went back up and we crossed over these to check out both the Sabin, the caissons, and then we walked this whole little bridge going across here to the power plant. This runs everything on hydroelectric power. This isn't the big one. That's downstream a little bit this way. But they do have excess power that they actually sell back to the power company so they can run, you know, at least the eastern half of the Upper Peninsula just from the water that comes through here, and especially as you go down here with the current. There's a chain, you know, the river goes this way, but there's an actual channel that comes up this way to actually feed the big power plant for the municipality. This is what happened to those Native American bones that they had. They decided to repatriate them. There was a big push, especially around 2010, where they started to get all the bones together. They realized where they were from. They had all the notes of where it was brought up, and they brought them back and actually used a simulated birch bark canoe to bring them back and to give them proper burials. And this is the new lock, so they'll fill in Davis. They'll widen this one up. All the spoils will go into here, and then this will be used so that they can actually run a crane back and forth to pick these giant gates up for maintenance. So that's what the new system will look like. Eventually, you can see the giant, they've already built 2 or 3 of these last season. But the big project this year was to actually dredge out going underneath the International Bridge and to get the water deep enough, because these locks never needed that depth. These big boats, especially the 1,000-footers, couldn't use it. So that's been the project to do that. Let's take a tour of the Soo Locks. What do you say?
The Soo Locks close each winter as Mother Nature freezes many of the shipping lanes on Lake Superior. It's the perfect time for maintenance, especially on their busiest lock, the Poe.
We're really fortunate. We have a 10-week outage every year. But that 10-week outage takes place between January 15th and March 25th. And so it's about the coldest time of year here in Sault Ste. Marie. And we have a very tight schedule. So we try to take and fit these projects, these big maintenance projects, into about an 8-week time frame. And it's tight. We go around the clock if necessary. We started out working 7 days a week. We've been able to come back to 6 days a week now. But we stay right on it, and schedule is everything. We stay right on that schedule and really pay close attention.
Right now I'm in the very bottom of the Poe, which is the largest lock at the Soo Locks. I've been told that when this is filled, it has over 70 million gallons of water inside of it. Now, to put that into perspective, that would be 1,000 Olympic pools. The Poe being the largest means that this is the only one that can take the 1,000-footers. So now you're talking 96% of the use here is all going through this one lock. So now you can see the importance that literally 90% of the nation's iron ore comes through just this one lock. So what happens if there's breakage? In the case here, there's actually a spot you can see where there's some damage to the sill that they're repairing. Once that's repaired, they'll fill the water back in, and they'll be back in business when it opens on March 25th.
It took nearly 8 hours to drain the water out of this lock, and work immediately began on the sill that has been leaking. It's similar to fixing the seal on the threshold of your front door at home. Just in front of that massive threshold is a hole to keep debris from not letting the gate shut. Like your front door welcome mat that collects dirt, it traps junk like stumps, rocks, and even snowmobiles.
Oh, lots of different things over there. It was interesting this past summer. Somebody in a tour boat dropped their phone into the Poe Lock and sent us a letter, and we got that letter about a couple months ago anyway, and we kind of shared it. They asked if we could find their phone for them, and Thought that was kind of funny. We didn't think we'd have a chance. Well, sure enough, we found the phone and we mailed it back to him here last week. But that's kind of odd thing you do. Of course, the phone wasn't of any use anymore.
A sectional dam built of stop logs holds back the St. Mary's River. It's constantly dripping as the water tries to find its way downstream. That water naturally follows gravity to sumps that take it away. Normally, water flows in and out of the lock through these huge 12 by 14 culverts. These lead to tunnels that are controlled by massive valves. The Poe's valves need a closer inspection, so the scaffolding is set up. And since it's deep within the tunnel system, portable lights are needed to illuminate the problem.
We're actually walking down the water area. This is where the water comes through. It's hard to imagine unless you're down here how big this is.
Further down in the culvert are tunnels that go underneath the lock. We crawled through a port to get a look at the laterals that line each end of the lock.
I'm down in the very bottom of the Poe right now. What a perfect opportunity for them to actually take a barge and put it inside here, drain all the water down, and have their own private little dry dock to be able to work on the vessel. There's a lot of work they'll do, sounding the hull, make sure it's in good shape. It's an older barge, but this is what it looks like inside the Poe.
A brand new barge and crane have joined the fleet this season. It's a sectional barge that can be customized to any size needed. This towering crane has the lift capacity to pick up a 220-ton gate.
Here's something you probably didn't know too. This is the power plant for the Soo Locks. They're actually self-sufficient. They can provide all their own power. In addition, they can actually power 20% of the rest of the UP just from water generated from the St. Mary's River.
Turbines spin from the downward flow of water of the St. Mary's, enough to power energy-hungry compressors that bubble the water around the gates to keep them from freezing shut. Everything on these man-made islands is self-sufficient thanks to generators here.
We're generating electricity, not only for ourselves, we're self-sustained at the Soo Locks here, but we also supply electricity to the local utility, Cloverland Electric.
Andre is an electrical engineer who's in charge of the billion-dollar build for the new lock. He says 2 antiquated locks will be transformed in the process.
We hope to fill in the Davis lock using some of the spoils and dredge material along with some of the excavation material from the Sabin lock. We also hope we can grade that land in such a way that we have a slope from one end of the facility to the other, from east to west, to allow some of our new heavy lift equipment that we saw on our tour. The new crawler crane that we have, our new gate lifter, the replacement to the Paul Bunyan. We want to be able to traverse that crane from one end of the facility to the other.
We had 3 locks in operation. Now we've been operating 2 locks for quite a while now. We have with the new lock that will give us a 3rd operating lock, and we'll have a lot of options then. We'll have options for dewatering in the summertime and doing maintenance in the summer. And we'll have options on whether or not we want to operate 1 or 2 or 3 locks. So we've got, it should set us up pretty good for the future.
For more on the new lock and its importance to the nation, check out the story on Great Lakes Now on your favorite PBS station or at greatlakesnow.org.
Loved my visit there, and those people were just totally generous with their time. And I mean, gave us the whole day and said, just where do you want to go? It was fantastic. And I talked about the dredging that they did over the last year and a half. Here's where they're actually scooping it up. And here's the International Bridge. So you can't blast. So what they do is they put this grinder on there, and this actually goes down and grinds into the actual bedrock, and then they scoop it up. And then the other part of all the time they've spent is to clear an area to put it on. All the spoils have to go somewhere, so all this rock has to go someplace, and they kind of build their own little island that'll be between the locks right over there. So it's pretty cool technology that they have. Here you go. This is really it's a 3D video, but I just have the big shot of what the gates will look like here. $1.3 billion, and I think they've only got funding right now for half of that. It's unbelievable that it'll take until 2030 for them to actually finish this project, but to see how much goes into it, it's pretty incredible. we're hoping, and I talked with them, once they drain the Sabin, it would be great to go down there and see some of these things that were built in 1917. And I've tried to convince them that, hey, this is a guy that should be there, right? I mean, this is a guy doing lectures on this stuff. So the hope is we can, but with safety and especially with COVID right now, it used to be where I could get a ride in any Coast Guard helicopter or fly a B-52 or do, whatever we want to do. Now a lot of the ships and stuff are really starting to, because of COVID, which is a part of we want it to be safe, obviously, and they don't need somebody introducing, any kind of problems on board. But literally, I think it's being used as a scapegoat. And that's just because I'm sad because I haven't had such cool adventures yet, which I hope if I get more time to write, I've got to sit down. I mean, the one thing, Brian knows this, by working at a television station, we not only get this great access, but we get the ability to record it. So to go back and to watch the footage, and I was lucky when I left TV5, I literally bought the rights to all of my shipwreck stuff, all of my flying adventures. So I have all of the last flights out of B-52 from Sawyer to Wurtsmith. Just amazing stuff from the Goodyear blimp when they were remodeling the Bishop Airport. Just great snapshots of the history, and it to me it was worth $1 million. Luckily the TV station didn't know what it was worth. I mean, and quite honestly, they had some underwater work they wanted me to do anyways, so we did a really nice trade, and that's led to a couple of documentaries. And again, just an honor to be able to share these stories and to be able to have it on video to do. How many people have watched on TV5 the Vault series that they're doing now? If you watch there and go to their website too, the Video Vault, they're bringing up a lot of these great stories, and it's so amazing. Mel Cerro was just on the last one, and to see the people that I worked with, I was lucky to come in at the perfect time at TV5 when Chuck Waters was still there, Jim Payton was still there. These are icons that now, Dick Fabian, was on the Take 5 show, and sadly they've all passed now, and it was our honor to be able to spend time with all of those guys and gals that have worked there. And so the Vault is bringing a lot of those things back, and I'm honored when they air my stuff, because I'm like, does anybody even know who Ric Mixter was? It's nice that at least a couple people know. But here's some of the new features that we'll have for our wonderful $1 billion paycheck. You saw that they've already put some of the guard walls in here. They're going to have a whole new hands-free mooring unit now. This is significant in that the ships, you saw that big capstan that we had in the early Sabin lock. This is actually one that comes out and stabilizes the ship automatically. So when they come in, the Fitzgerald actually ran into the MacArthur Lock and did significant damage. So that's the real tricky part as they come in. Many of them using their bow thrusters to try to ease themselves in, but it's still very tight quarters, especially when you're talking 1,000-footer. So to have the assists are great. The ship arrestor system too is amazing. This is if the ship breaks through, like we saw the one that came through and took out the Canadian lock. There's actually, it's a braking system that's down a huge, looks like an elevator shaft. And we saw it in the Poe with these weights that would arrest the ship, slow it down. There's some new technology that'll be used there too to keep it safe. And again, this will be a duplicate of the size that can handle 1,000-footers. So we'll now have 2 places that they'll be able to do that. I got to bring a shipwreck story in, and most people don't know there was a shipwreck right at the Soo. This is a tugboat that was actually sunk in 2013, and they kept it very, very low key. And it was just that they were towing 2 tugboats, and all of a sudden looked behind them, and one of the tugboats, the Hammond Bay, was gone. Like, I can't imagine what the skipper had to say about that. I know we've got a couple captains here, but how do you go, well, it was there a minute ago. I don't know where it went. So they went out and they used their own sonar, and they discovered where it was, and they luckily have the ability to be able to lift very heavy things there. So they brought in some boats to bring it up, and from what I understand, the radios fired up, that the lake didn't destroy them. They didn't know how long it would last, and I haven't got an update on what actually the Hammond Bay is doing now. But yeah, that's the little shipwreck that we're at the Soo. This clown's got all kinds of stories, and if you want to hear more of them, here we are looking at not only the Poe, but this is that barge that they worked on that, again, drain all the water out. The barge just kind of settles down. They put cribbing underneath it, and they can do all their winter work and not have to bring it to any of the dry docks, which is pretty slick. So if you want to learn more stories, shipwreckpodcast.com. Shipwrecks.com. I've actually got a 4-hour podcast now on the Edmund Fitzgerald. So the guys that built it, the guys that actually sailed it, all of the investigations from Jean-Michel Cousteau, who I met in Chicago, all the different people, and it's literally, it is 4 hours, not just of me talking, but of the really significant, including Captain Cooper, who followed the Fitzgerald and tried to pick up lives afterwards. So great stories there. 1913 storm, the 1940 storm. These are places that have actual, where you might read in a book, this is the actual people that survived the 13 storm. So two of the wheels, or one of the wheelsmen and one that was a kid that went through were there. 1940, the Armistice Day storm, Fitzgerald went through. It had winds that were up to 70 knots. The Armistice Day storm was nearly twice that, 126 mile-an-hour winds, and it wiped out 3 ships, and I've got 2 guys that survived from that. Not to mention Cooper made it through that storm too, and said it was way worse than the Fitzgerald storm. So great stuff there. You can also hear some of the interviews I've found. 1934, I found things from the Henry Court, a whaleback freighter that went down. The Bay City built City of Bangor, one of the guys that was actually did a phone interview talking about going through the snowdrifts when he was stranded up in the Keweenaw. And basically they had 4 different captains that were on board because they were bringing them back to Duluth. And all the ship crashes aground with a couple hundred automobiles on top. And they haul their baggage through, and pretty soon the crew goes, "Why are we doing this?" And they left all the captain's stuff out in the woods. And the captain goes, "I'm the captain." He goes, "You are on the ship, but not here." So these are the great stories that we get to hear. And for me, to share those in a podcast in a format that now it's just like my old radio days when I was on WIOG. It's cool to be able to bring that audio back and to share those and it's a little easier too. As we put videos together, we always have to have visuals to make it go. I love these podcasts where I don't have to worry about what the storm looks like. I'll just put a little wind in there and you guys will like it. LakeFury.com has all of my products. I did bring Wheelsman books and my brand new Bottled Goodbyes, which is 200 pages. As I said, it's got not only significant bottles that were found from the Titanic. There was at least 3 bottles. There's photographs of those messages. Also, a shipwreck that they just found, the Piermark at 18. I was writing the chapter as they found the ship. So it's the first images you'll see of that boat. And the Balloonatic. Another time I've got to come out here and tell you about my buddy. The story is amazing of this crazy daredevil that tried to sail across Lake Michigan. And I won't ruin the story for you, but it didn't turn out good. They might have found 3 bottles from this guy, and sadly we haven't found him yet. So lots of history there. Bottle of Goodbyes are up here, any of the books for $20. Is there any questions about what I've covered today? And I know we've got some minds here that probably can help. Yeah, Cap?
Hey, Rick, the Paul Bunyan heavy lift barge, when did they retire that?
I don't think it's retired. I think they're still doing, I mean, they've got the brand new one. And when I went there, two and a half seasons ago, it was brand new. So my gut tells me they probably aren't doing much with it, but I haven't heard of it being scrapped out. That was, I think, built in Wisconsin and very unique, the derrick there. When we went up this past summer, I had some time, as you know, ran up and saw the derricks that they used to dredge up all of the copper tailings that were left, especially around the Keweenaw. And there's one that stalled out right there in the lake, and it was amazing to crawl through it. Dangerous, but really amazing to go through all the different pieces. I also spent in, I'm a board member with the Whitefish Point Museum, the Shipwreck Society. We found, it was originally released, we found 3 shipwrecks. We found 2 just from Bay City. It's now, we went through the records, we found 12 new shipwrecks last summer. Daryl Ertel is a fantastic researcher, and I was lucky enough just to be the boat boy on board to pull cable. And when I was there, we found the Michigan, which is in my book. So I'm lucky I didn't write "It Hasn't Been Found," right? So a great, a fantastic story, a tragic story. We found the Curtis, which I'll have to come back and tell you about. It was lost. Heinz Lumber in a big storm in '09 lost, I think, 4 of their ships, 2 barges plus the Curtis. And the Curtis still has Heinz Lumber painted on the side of it, 500 feet deep. It's amazing. So lots of great stuff. Yes?
How big was the boat your friend got lost in?
Got lost in, which one's that?
The sailboat that
I'm trying to remember what
You just mentioned they took off with a sailboat and then...
Your balloonist. Yeah.
oh, the balloonist. Yeah, the balloonist. Yeah, he was in a balloon. Yeah, hot air balloon. I say friend, and I'm being silly because it was in the 1800s. And while I'm getting a gray beard, I'm not there yet. Yes.
The picture you showed of the main lock building at the Soo.
Yep.
At the top of it, there was quite an extension, and all the ones you see now, that's off. What was that for?
I'm not sure. Maybe I can go back on the picture and see. Was it like very early on, or where was it? This one here? Yeah. That's the actual control tower.
Okay.
Yeah.
On top of that, there was an extension of some type.
Yeah. In fact, if we look at, let's see. Oh, right here. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the control tower, and I think this has been removed now. And in modern times, I'm not sure what time they actually cleared this out, but it's now, you know, just that area where you saw the monitors and stuff. That's just at this level up here. So this whole thing must have been taken down, and I'm not sure when they did that, Don. Oh, that's as the ships come in, this is the bird's eye view to watch them come in. So they can actually control them like aircraft controllers. You know, like you'd call in and you'd say, hey, before radio, they could actually look down. But as radio came in, as we got into the 20s and the 30s, and especially the 40s, you know, they'd actually radio in their position. Here they have lights that would actually guide the ship. You would see 1 or 3 in a semaphore kind of a thing where they could tell which lock you're supposed to go to. So these guys would actually control that until radio came in. Yeah.
Yeah, when you dove for the Edmund Fitzgerald, how deep did you have to go?
Oh, the question is, how deep did I have to go for the Edmund Fitzgerald? The deepest part is 550 feet down to the stern section. It's about 500 to the bow section. So we were down there in a submarine, thank heavens, because there's been divers that go that deep, but sadly to come back up, it takes 4 hours. And when you're coming back up, you're hanging on the line because you're trying to conserve your air, and it's freezing cold. It's 30 to 5 degrees. It's right above zero. When I was in the submarine started to sweat because of the condensation from our breath, and it was so cold on the outside of the skin of the Delta submarine. And as I went down, the water's starting to pool on the bottom, and I'm like trying to be cool to tell the guy, hey, there's water in the submarine, you know. And the guy looks at me, he goes, Rick, if there was a hole in this submarine at this pressure, it would cut you in half. And, oh, good, I feel good now. The nice thing is the submarine before us was called the Clelia, and that's the one that Larry Elliott from Channel 12 went in. And this is has a giant bubble that they sat in the front, so there was all glass around them. I had glass in front, but it was filled with water, so it was horrible out front. And the Delta on the sides had little tiny portholes, so I could see good portions of the wreck, but you're still only seeing, tiny bits of it. And the letters Edmund Fitzgerald are this tall. So as you go by, you get ED in your glass, and that's it. So it's massively huge. And as you see it and you kind of pull away, the light falls off. So you don't get to see the whole wreck until you get to, we gave it to Jim Clary, who painted from all the pieces everything together. And only then did we tell what the massive destruction was on that ship. And most of the stuff we found, too, was different than what had been reported by the Coast Guard. Yes, sir?
Who owns those submarines and who maintains them?
For the ones that we did, Delta Oceanographics was the one that Brian and I took for the Bradley and for the Fitzgerald. And it's a little yellow submarine, which is mandatory, right? The Beatles told us that all submarines have to be, and they have to be in octopus's gardens. Now, it's a tiny submarine, and it's used for research on mostly the ocean. And it's really not, the Great Lakes, they came in here and they actually had to change their buoyancy because salt water is more buoyant. So they had to change the weights that were there. So Delta out of California had that one. Clelia was Harbor Branch Oceanographic. So they control, the Clelia and several other units. They're the ones that have done, a lot of ocean work. And then, of course, Sucoup was the one that the Cousteau Society had when they came in to do it, too. So most of them off. There is a local person that has a submarine that I saw on the Griffin show. So there is a local submarine that's around, and I had begged for a ride because I thought it'd be great to go and dive the Morel or some of these ones. As you go as a scuba diver, I'm about limited to 160 feet, because what happens is as you breathe in oxygen, we're breathing in about 80% of your oxygen. The nitrogen level starts getting higher and higher, and as you go deeper and deeper and you take a breath, that nitrogen starts to poison your brain. You get narcosis. And what happens is past 80 feet, I start to get a little nervous. You start thinking about silly stuff like sea monsters and stuff. But it's easy, when you're in a void and you're floating there and you have to put your hand, for me, to figure my brain out. I put my hand out because there's no top or there's no bottom when you're in, especially with the Fitzgerald. I was filming the submarine. There's no bottom. It's 500 feet down. So I'm just filming all the underwater sub stuff with my scuba gear on. I'm swimming around. I put my hand out in front. But as I dive down to about 160 feet, my brain starts to get crazy, like I had about 6 beers or 7 beers and about 7 shots, and this right eye starts going way off here, and everything is ridiculous at that point. So you don't look at your gauges, you don't check things out, and that's deadly when you're breathing now twice the intake of the air, because you're breathing in more, and unfortunately those tanks aren't forever. So it's very difficult to do that depth. What people do is they bring in helium and they mix it in, and they use computers to try to figure that out, and I think that's witchcraft. I think it's wonderful that people do these dives to 300 feet, but I've lost friends that do these deep dives, and it's at a level that I'm just not comfortable with, nor am I comfortable ever being a producer on a project that would send somebody to go do something like that. So for me, an underwater robot is cheaper, it can stay down longer, it doesn't get narked, and it's just a better way to do it. Is it great to be down there and see it? It is. To experience it, it's amazing. Yes, Skipper?
Rick, this is Jim Semerad. I was talking with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they led me to believe that the funding for the new lock is forecasted, but I also worked in the government. I understand the difference between allocated monies and obligated monies.
Yep.
So they also told me that if they received more than $150 million a year, they couldn't spend it because they really are at capacity with the footprint that they have. So did you hear anything differently that might either...
I didn't, but I have a great fund, the Ric Mixter Fund, which a great place to put extra government money that they don't have. I don't know how that works, and I know even with the change in administration with a different president, that can all get changed. But I know they do lock it in, and when they're halfway through it, it's very unlikely that they'll just say, hey, just stop. So I'm sure that the money will come through. And these Soo Locks have paid for themselves over and over and over and over and over again. When you think about the billions of dollars that come through there every year, it's more than worth the amount of money that we put in there. So for anybody to even think, oh, it's not going to be worth it, of course it's worth it. I mean, that's all the steel that's coming out, 90% of what the world uses. So it's pretty significant. Yes, sir?
Do they have to pay to go through the lock?
They used to. Yeah, when they first started out in the state of Michigan, remember, traded the 76,000 acres or whatever, which they did very well. They did buy some copper land and made a lot of money on the sale. But the government was charging a tonnage fee, and they made good money on it. But then the Army Corps took over the whole project, and once it became a United States project, it was too difficult to try to manage that. So they basically said, just come through for free. And so now anything with a motor can go through. So if you go in there with a motorboat, they technically have to lock you through. Now you might get a nasty look if it's really tiny, but you would be legal to go through. Yes, sir?
Were you using nitrox?
Nitrox is great when you get, anything when you're doing to 130 feet or so within sport diving limits. It's great. It gives you great clarity. It's just pushing more oxygen in there to offset that nitrogen that you normally build up. It's a great feeling, but unfortunately, helium is the only way to really get down, and do 300 feet with a clear head. And there's so many divers that are really great at doing this and keeping it balanced and stuff. The problem is you can't back somebody up. You're having a safety diver on everything that I do, it's almost as important as having Her Majesty the Queen. I couldn't live life without her. My safety diver is equally as important, who helps me breathe. And because many times I'm loaded up with a lot of gear trying to figure figure out a shot, trying to think, I'm not looking at my gauges as much as I want. So I get somebody that backs me up, and they tell me when it's time. And then the computer also chirps. So I've got a backup that if once I hit my profile at a certain depth, it starts going beep, 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 tells me it's time to leave. But really, I'm getting, as I get older, your body changes and my wetsuit gets tighter. I don't know why that happens. It might be these amazing cheese puffs they have here. I don't know. But as I do that, the diving for me is wonderful, and I love to experience it. But the truth is, underwater gear is so inexpensive now. Whitefish Point has a $100,000 robot, and we just bought a new $60,000 4K robot that can go and do 800 feet. Why would I go down there and spend time if I can only get 2 minutes? With the robot, I can go down there and get 5 hours. And the worst part would be we hang it up, and we don't want to do that because obviously you don't want to lose the robot. And when we dove one of the wrecks this summer, it got hung up. Luckily we got it back, and that's part of the trick. But these wrecks were never designed for people to come and see them. They're broken apart. There's mass sticking everywhere. There's hooks, all kinds of traps for the cameras, and we've got to be very careful because ultimately we're responsible to the people that that help us pay for this, especially the people who visit our museum, which is one of the most visited museums on the Great Lakes. Yes?
Did you say the new lock is going to be as big as the Poe Lock?
It will, so we'll have two of the same size.
And will they be making bigger ships?
They can, but I think we've reached exactly where we need to be. When the Fitzgerald was built, the Army Corps freaked out. They're like, oh my God, you can't build another one. Well, they did. The Homer came out, it was a foot bigger than the Fitz. They put a moratorium out and said you can't go any longer than 730. Well, of course, we know that eventually we went to the 1,000-footers. First the Blau at 800 and came up. We won't, I don't think we'll see, because of the market the way we are now. If we ever become, where we don't have the competition of China steel and stuff, maybe we would do that, but I don't know. The taconite industry has revolutionized an industry that we thought was dead by the 1940s. Now we can take this low-grade iron ore, turn it into a more, iron content, and actually ship it easier than we used to with bulk iron ore. So it's a lot better process now. We hope that'll last us forever, but our mines in Marquette are all dry, not dry, but pretty much closed down because the market's just not strong enough. Yes?
Isn't there an international border going somewhere through those locks?
Yeah, the river system itself, and that was part of the the bargain that we made, that to figure out where that would be when we finally settled our dispute with Britain. It's this side will be Canada and this will be the United States. So there is a division, and the lock the Canadian lock now is on their side of it. They've got their own power supply too. That lock is used mostly for the boat tours now, and you probably heard the Soo Lock boat tours just got sold. I think Interlake, which just bought the Badger, now owns the Soo Lock tours, which is kind of weird. I mean, family business I thought would have been great to keep there forever. Now I'm hearing Shepler's was sold over the last week too, which is sad to see. And they're still retaining at least 10% of the business, but it's sorry to see a lot of the conglomerates come up that maybe they won't be as dedicated to this. I hope that the lock boats are always there. You see them in all my footage. It's a great way to experience the locks. How many people have taken it? Awesome. Yeah, and if you haven't, go up there and get a pasty. And if you're really hardy, get a kudagi, right? Or two-hearted beer, hey? That's good stuff too. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I thought that the rest of the funding was in Biden's infrastructure bill.
Good question. In fact, I don't follow it. I'd rather be down inside the locks, but there's a good possibility that I know if we're going into 2030 that there's always going to be that potential for something that will flip. But I do know that it's not all locked in, that's part of everything that they put in there is that, the 1.3 billion, and we don't even know it'll be the price because you never know what'll happen. There's too many other things that can happen that could slow them down, and it's been evident in every lock that they built. Except the MacArthur, which during wartime, we have a little bit different rules to get stuff done. Yes?
Yeah, Rick, was there any other sites looked at besides just the Soo Locks when they started out looking at where's the best place to put those locks?
I don't think that there has been. I mean, it's the most logical because it was right alongside those one rapids, and once they got past that, they were good for the lighter ships. The problem was once the ships started getting heavier, we had to dredge it out. So it becomes a project every year now for them to try to clear it out. Just like the Saginaw River. We always had problems with dredging the mouth of the Saginaw River, and that's why you see Gull Island out there and stuff as they have to go through and dredge it out, because the lake always proves that no matter how much you dig, it'll just come back and fill it in for you. So unfortunately, it's a never-ending process. But for the rocks and stuff, it's a bigger process to go out and grind it out and to get it out of there. And that's why it's going to take so much infrastructure to get it deep enough so that the vessels can go into those new locks as well. Yes?
Is hard hat diving still a popular way of doing work on the...
Yeah, it's the safest. I mean, a lot of people like to use the Mark Vs, and they've moved into a lot more technical stuff that friends of mine that do that again. That's hardcore, and these people, you know, in confined spaces, and you can't really be claustrophobic in that. People always ask me when I dive, isn't that claustrophobic? It's not. It's the absolute opposite. It's agoraphobic because you get in there and it's so much expanse that I almost freak out, where your brain, if you've got a line that goes down to the shipwreck, you can follow it. And the second that I see the shipwreck, my mind goes, okay, I know where I'm at. This is up, this is down. But there's sometimes when I'm in the water column, like Lake Erie, where it's like, take your mom's best pea soup, throw it in a bathtub, jump into the bathtub and go down. That's what Lake Erie's like. So the only way I can tell what's up and what's down is to watch my bubbles. That's how bad it gets. So the Mark V divers, they'll weight their feet down. They put heavy weight down. Their job is to get to the bottom where the divers want to hover.
How far down do they go?
Well, I don't know I know over 1,000. I know the oil guys can go down and do extreme depth stuff. So I know that there's definitely, and because we're mostly water, we can actually do those depths, you know, because our bodies can take it. But unfortunately, if you have any closed spaces like earaches, or if we get a blockage or anything like that, it's horrible. I mean, there's people who've ruptured their ears and stuff because you just can't. So sometimes Sudafed's a nice way for me to clear those out before I go down as well.
I read one time, Morgan City, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Hard hat capital of the world.
No kidding. In Louisiana?
Yeah, something to do with oil derricks.
That's cool. I might need to go hang out there. Louisiana has good jambalaya too, and I'm into that. One maybe final question? Yes?
I got one final question. I had the privilege of riding the Tregurtha through the locks.
No kidding. Tregurtha through the locks, he rode.
If you ever get a chance to arrange it, do it. But there's only 2.5 foot of space on each side of the lock.
No kidding.
Because the lock's 105 and the Tregurtha's 100. Is the new lock being wider?
No, same width is what I understand. 2 foot of clearance when the Tregurtha goes through. That's a squeeze, and no matter which way you fit it. I mean, and you saw in the footage too, I mean, they do that in every weather, you know, when they come in, so it's pretty incredible. I can't thank you enough to have a great crowd like this and to come off of, you know, where I had to stay home for so many months not doing lectures, and especially doing Zoom lectures. Zoom has opened it up now where I'm doing talks for Minnesota, Boise, Idaho, all around the country, and that's great. But when you don't have a reaction of people, it drives you insane. I just can't do it. So to be here in person, to be able to share these stories with a fantastic group, the Historical Society needs your help. Please work with them. If you haven't signed up to at least get their information, remember you get that amazing newsletter if you join them. And please support those museums this summer, and I'll see you in the water. How's that?
Thank you.
Thank you.